Welcome back. Well, as we know, there's a lot of changes going on in Washington, a lot of shakeups, and as they continue to get involved in agencies and audit agencies, they're uncovering a lot of things that we may suspected were there, hope that it wasn't there, and found out in many cases it's worse than we ever can possibly think. So very timely for me to have back with us Auron McIntyre, the author of The Total State and How the Liberal Democracies Become Tyrannies. He's also the host of the Auron McIntyre Show and often a columnist for Blaze News. The cover of the book there on the screen, and you can check that out at online, Total State, The Total State. He does have a website, auronmcintyre.substack.com. And by the way, it's spelled A-U-R-O-N, McIntyre.substack.com. Auron, good to see you. How are you, friend?
Doing well. Thanks for having me back.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so your book and everything deals with the fact that you obviously, we all realize something's been under the covers for a long time, and I think we're a little bit on tilt that it's worse than we thought. You recently published a couple of articles discussing the rise of unaccountable government. What's behind that?
Well, as we've discussed before, the United States, unfortunately, has seen an evolution in the way that its government was run. It has strayed very far from the constitutional understanding and framework that was set up by those that created this country, and has instead moved towards unaccountable bureaucracy. Unfortunately, that's become pretty obvious over the last decade or so. Very few people looking at the presidency of Joe Biden believed he was ultimately in charge of what was going on. But now that we see the rot at the heart of the total state, now that we're seeing what that bureaucracy was actually dedicated to, we're recognizing how horrendous things have been. We knew it was bad, but when you look at, for instance, the dismantling of USAID, we recognize the amount of foreign aid that was really just going to fund the most heinous progressive leftist projects around the world. It would be bad enough if our money was being stolen, if the American people were being taken for a ride, but it's even worse when the money is actively being deployed to fund some of the most evil things you can imagine. The idea that we're pushing atheism in Nepal, or we're pushing a transgender comic book in Peru, or a transgender musical in Colombia. These are all horrific things that our money is being dedicated to, and yet this has been done without any accountability up until this point.
Okay, so here they are uncovering, of course, the left is up in arms, legacy media is coming unglued and all this and that. I guess you would expect that. But at the same time, I think Americans are saying, we not only don't like the way the country's going, we're almost in shock that it was as bad as it is. We're heading down the road of cleaning it up. Do you think we'll succeed?
Well, we're already seeing important first steps. Like we said, the end of something like USAID is huge, because even though the total money amount, it doesn't touch anything like, say, entitlements, Social Security, those kind of things in the federal budget, the amount of money going into these massive progressive causes around the world really kept this entire architecture of ideology afloat. It is something that was making sure that all these NGOs and other organizations around the world continued to perpetuate the type of rot that we're talking about. We're also seeing that guys like Chris Rufo are tearing into the Department of Education, or now even the intelligence community. The fact that we just found out that there was a giant transgender chat room being operated inside our intelligence agencies like the CIA or the Department of Homeland Security, and that there was all kinds of different machinations going on here, not just with their own personal sexual escapades, but also their desire to recruit others, form some kind of resistance to Donald Trump. Obviously, this is just nefarious stuff that was operating at the highest levels inside the American government and the deep state. And the fact that this is being exposed and people like Tulsi Gabbard are declaring war on this is ultimately very heartening. That's why Trump had to bring in people like Tulsi Gabbard that were hated by the very communities that they are now in charge of. They needed someone who was coming from the outside, who didn't owe anything to anyone in the establishment, and would be willing to do the hard work of cleaning this up.
Okay, so in the meantime, as they uncover what seems to be worse than they anticipated, does this slow down the president's agenda?
Well, obviously, there's a good amount of rot, again, that has to be pulled out of all of this. And I hope that ultimately Donald Trump is willing to burn some of these organizations down to the core if necessary in order to get this ideology out. If you don't get it root and branch, then the people who were responsible for it arising in the first place will continue what they were doing. The good news about Donald Trump this time around is it seems like he was prepared for the necessity of this action, and he's continuing his flood the zone strategy. The media has already complained multiple times about the fact that Donald Trump and his administration are moving so fast that they can't possibly keep up. They can't create the level of outrage and resistance that they did in his first term, and they are basically getting bowled over by the amount of action that is taking place in this administration. And so it would seem, at least at the beginning of this, that the Trump administration is able to expose this stuff, go after it, and keep pace with the agenda. But this is, of course, a marathon, not just a sprint. And so ultimately the question will be, can they maintain this pace? I hope that the answer is yes. And the fact that Trump has gotten so many of his Senate confirmation picks this time as compared to last time is, again, heartening, because it means he has the personnel in place to go ahead and carry out the type of agenda that he was elected to do.
There's another part of this, Auron, that's really interesting. While we uncover this, it's somewhat globally embarrassing that we have this rot, but at the same time, this exposure has given hope to other countries. How do you see that?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just over in London for the ARC conference, the one that Jordan Peterson has put on, and there's a large degree of politicians from the UK, Canada, Australia, all coming in. And there's this simultaneous feeling where some of the more establishment politicians are scared to follow Elon and Donald Trump. They think that ultimately there could be some kind of blowback in their own countries if they saddle up beside those figures too closely. But they're also inspired by what's going on. And anyone under, I'd say, 50 there was incredibly enthusiastic about the idea that their own country could follow in the steps of the United States. In a lot of ways, the United States was ground zero for this kind of managerial revolution that took over the government and spread this woke mind virus through all of these different organizations. But it's also ground zero for the solution. And I think it's great that a lot of the average people in these countries are recognizing the momentum they could bring, but also the politicians are finally recognizing that they don't need to bow and scrape to progressivism anymore. There's a new sheriff in town, and they can recognize the viability of taking the same type of action that we're seeing in the United States in their own country.
So, in the meantime, does Elon Musk survive?
Well, a lot of people have tried to play off the Elon Musk and Trump dynamic. You know, they want to make Trump, who is famously someone who enjoys the limelight, enjoys the praise, they want to make him jealous of Elon. They want to, call him the real president or the shadow president, these kind of things, hoping that they will play off against each other. They will antagonize each other and eventually drive a wedge between them. But I don't think that's going to happen. Ultimately, Elon Musk was very important to Donald Trump's ascendance in the second term. We all look now back at the acquisition of Twitter as possibly one of the most important political actions that has taken place in 50 plus years. And so there's a very important role that Musk plays inside the administration. Also, this time around, Trump seems more comfortable with delegating. He recognizes the importance of getting competent people who are loyal to him, dedicated to the MAGA cause, and are ultimately willing to execute on that. And he doesn't feel as it isn't as important to him to be involved in every single decision, to have his thumb on the scale every single time. So while a lot of people are trying to drive this wedge between Elon and Trump, I don't really see that forming right now.
So, obviously the left is coming unglued, and they have accused him of just being vindictive and a dictator and all that stuff. So, but the end of the day, it looks like to me what he's doing is he's using his new team to expose the rot, which takes out his enemies by sheer, not only discrediting them, but just ruining their reputation. He doesn't have to spend time going after them legally. He just ruins them by exposing what they've done. Is that part of it?
Yeah, and ultimately, I think the response that you're seeing from the left is what happens when you have an actual executive in the office. For so long, the executive branch has been more or less farmed out to expertise, to an oligarchic technocratic class that's taken over so much of what's going on. And so the vigorous use of constitutional executive power scares the people who are deeply invested in that mode of operating the government. But if you've read the Federalist Papers, you know that in Federalist 51, famously, Hamilton says that ambition has to check ambition. You need robust branches of government that are going to push back against each other when one overextends. It's been very clear for a long time that the left, progressives, and even a number of people in the Republican Party were really comfortable with the idea that the president was more of a vestigial office, that ultimately guys like Anthony Fauci and other experts should run the country with just the fig leaf of an elected leader standing in front of them. But that is not what the American people want. It's not what the Constitution says. And this time around, it's not what Donald Trump is allowing. And that is very encouraging.
As we uncover more of the rot, it does create a further disconnect in trust in government. On the other hand, this is the healthiest thing we can do to restore that trust. Do you think that can be accomplished?
It can be, but it is a tricky thing. Like you said, we really do need to strip out some of the trust that existed in government, and more importantly, the expert class, before we can go back and restore the integrity of these institutions. The institutions have to start doing what they say on the label. We had a Department of Education that didn't educate any of the children. We have a Department of Homeland Security that had no interest in actually protecting the people of the United States. A Federal Bureau of Investigation that only investigated the political enemies of the Democratic Party. If we want any of these institutions to mean anything anymore, they have to start doing what they're supposed to do. And in some cases, like the Department of Education, they should just be done away with because they never did what they said they were going to do. The Department of Education has been a failure since its very beginning, and there's simply no reason to keep it around. So by choosing which institutions ultimately to keep, which ones to reform, and which ones to entirely get rid of, Trump has the opportunity to reinvest America's faith in the institutions that matter, focusing on those that are doing their job, not just creating vast amounts of networks of bureaucrats just to serve as a progressive job program.
So one last question. There's a lot of players on the left that have gotten us to this mess. And most recently, the last 4 years has just almost been unbelievable. Do you think anybody of notoriety on the left will go down?
Well, a number of people who are probably more savvy operators than the left have been trying to put the woke away, trying to say we need to calm this down. We need to turn to maybe our economic message. You know, there's all these billionaires in charge. Maybe that's the winning ticket. They're trying to speak truth to their current audience, but their audience has become so rabid, their activist class has become so rabid that they want to continue to push these radical progressive policies, even in the face of their electoral and moral defeat. So I think you will see, you've seen people like Joy Reid losing their show. There seems to be some attempt by some of the media outlets. Jeff Bezos just came out and said that the Washington Post is going to dial back the radical leftism in some of its opinion pages. We'll see what actually happens with this. There has been some shift. I'm doubtful that they can completely turn the ship around given the state of their own staff and their own activist class. But there is certainly an attempt to do so. And when you do that, the most radical actors like Joy Reid do end up on the bench.
Yeah, they do. Hey, good to see you, friends. Thanks for staying in the fight. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, check out Auron's website, and that's Auron McIntyre.substack.com. That's where you can connect with him. Check out his book, The Total State, and check out his show. Thanks, Auron. Good to see you, bud.
Thanks again.
Yeah, God bless.